Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with a good friend and coach, John Opalewski. How are you today, John?
Hey, Jim, I'm doing well. It's so good to be with you here. Episode 178 today.
178. That's a lot of episodes. We should be
It
we should be
is.
smart by now, I would think.
You would think so.
You would think so. Still learning, still growing.
Yes, we
Tell
are.
us about 178. I'm intrigued by the title.
Yeah, it's called Protect Yourself from Abuse.
Yeah.
Jim, we're in the middle of a series of pods on mental and emotional well-being. We've talked about
Yeah.
becoming our own best friend. We spent 2 weeks on that. We spent 2 weeks, 2 sessions telling our anger where to go.
Yeah.
And today I'd like us to focus on the subject of protecting ourselves from people whose mission in life
Yeah.
is to hurt us. In
Okay.
2 Timothy chapter 4, the Apostle Paul said this to his young apprentice, the
Yeah.
young pastor Timothy. He said, Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. I love how Paul didn't minimize it. He
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
he did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done, which is really important there.
Yeah.
You too, he's talking to Timothy, you too should be on your guard against him
Yeah.
because he strongly opposed our message.
Yeah.
And Jim, I wish I would have understood that scripture right out of college,
Yeah.
but I didn't. I didn't learn about that in college. This axiom that difficult people go to church.
Yes, they do.
And the
Yes,
second
they do.
axiom is very closely aligned to it. Difficult people who go to church can cause a great deal of harm.
Yes.
And in most churches, I think the people, even after the pandemic, I still think the people who do a pastor a great deal of harm represent the minority.
Yeah.
I
But
believe
it doesn't
that.
take many though, right? It doesn't
It
take many
doesn't.
though. That's the thing. Yeah.
I mean, it could be 2% of your congregation, but if they're
Yes.
vocal, it'll feel
Yep.
like 50% of your
Yes.
congregation. And
Yeah.
because very few Bible colleges or seminaries teach this subject of how to deal with difficult people, or we have this philosophical idea that it's wrong
Yeah.
to deal with difficult people. When the abuse starts, most pastors are really ill prepared to
Yeah.
respond. And so, with that in mind, and Jim, I, I'd like to talk about 3 safeguards today that leaders
Please.
can use. But before I get into that, just your thoughts
Yeah.
initially on this
Well,
subject.
I think every leader, pastor or not, when you said abusive people, faces came, situations
Mhm.
came to their mind.
Oh,
They know what you're talking about. And I think what you're about to teach us is kind of how did we handle it, or have we handled it well, or maybe this gives us the courage now to handle it, because you said they may be 2% of your congregation, but 2% of your congregation can create 80% of the problems and chaos. And so to say,
that's
well,
right.
it's just the way they are, like, please don't do them any favors and allow them to continue to be in this sin and cause this damage without correction. You're a leader, not just a servant. So I'm anxious to hear how to deal
Yeah.
with these circumstances.
So so we're not going to again, I don't think in a podcast we ever are able to fully explore the subject, but we'll do our best. I want
Yeah.
to share 3 safeguards a leader can use
Yeah.
protect themselves from the abusive people who attend the church they lead. And
Yeah.
it's important to realize that these principles can also be applied to relationships in our personal life.
Yeah.
So this works not just as a leader, this works as a husband, this works as a father,
Yeah.
this works as a friend.
Yeah.
Here's the first one. Be convinced that standing up for yourself is the right thing to do.
Yes.
Jim, this is a hurdle for many pastors
Yeah.
because they have been taught, they've had it modeled to them that you just have to sit there and take it. That's your
Mm.
job as a pastor.
Mm-mm.
But if you don't get this first thing right, if you don't believe it's right, I mean, this is the cornerstone
Yeah.
of protecting yourself from abuse. If you don't believe it's the right thing to do, you will struggle for the rest of your life dealing
Yeah.
with difficult people.
And you'll attract them because they're getting out of that
Yes.
interaction what they need, which is a chew toy, a pin cushion. And so you are not helping them, and you will attract until those 2% become 10%. And
Yep.
now 100% of your problems are from a handful of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's such a good point, Jim. I didn't even
Yeah.
think about that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Uh, my son, Aaron, when he was in third grade, I was pastoring a local church here
Yeah.
in Michigan. And I knew the principal at his school and the superintendent of school very well.
Yeah.
We used to, the superintendent and I used to walk together and
Right
just had
on.
a good
Yeah.
relationship with him. And Aaron was getting shoved around by a kid on the playground who was probably twice his size. And he would come home
Yeah.
crying and upset about this boy named Jimmy who was not you, but pushing him around.
Yeah.
It wasn't Mr. Wiegand. Um,
Yeah.
and after about 3 or 4 days of that, I sat Aaron down and I said, you know what? Here's what I want you to do. And this is where a lot of people just I get nasty grams from people. But please understand, he was
Hmm.
in third grade. Okay, he's not an adult
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I said, the next time Jimmy pushes you, I want you to ball your fist up. And I showed him how to do it. And I want you to swing as hard as you can and hit him in the
Yeah.
nose.
Yeah. Right in the
And
nose. Yep.
my son Aaron didn't always obey, but he was on board with this plan immediately. He
Yeah.
he he was ready to go. And
Yeah.
so very next day, the scene unfolds. Uh, Jimmy pushes my son again, and Aaron just smokes him in the
Yeah.
nose.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to get a call from the principal. I knew I was going to talk to the superintendent, and I did. And I sat down with him and I said, I told my son to do that
Yeah.
because here's what was happening on that playground. And Jimmy never came near Aaron again. Problem
Yeah.
solved.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not recommending that you as an adult start punching people out. I mean, but you get the point, right?
Yeah.
When you're confronted with abuse, when people treat you like a doormat, you have the right to refuse to be treated like that.
Yes, you do.
You
Yes,
are
you do.
made in the image of God. You're not a
Yeah.
doormat because you have REV dot in front of your name.
Yeah.
Be convinced that standing up for yourself is the right thing to do. What do you think about that one, Jim?
Had the same conversation with my son, and the
Hmm.
same thing happened after talking to principals and teachers. And well, we like the kids to work them, matters out themselves. I'm like, well, the difference between the jungle and your classroom or the playground is that we walk on two legs. And if that's the way it is, then I'm going to teach my kid how to. I went a step farther. Sit on top of his chest until someone pulls you off. I don't care if you're screaming and teeth are coming out. You keep punching. And this may be men talk. Women are probably aghast right now, and I get that, ladies. I apologize, but here's the deal. That's not just good for my son. That's good for the bully. The way a
Hmm.
bully becomes a bully and stays as bully is no one stands up to them. The way that a
Yes,
bully stops being a bully is they realize that they're not the only dangerous thing in the jungle, and it
yeah,
begins to cultivate a respect for humanity. And maybe the kid's that way because his dad's that way and it's abused. I'm not justifying violence, but I think we're both agreeing that we wanted our sons, and we want people listening right now to know that you are not a victim for the most angry person in the room, the
that's
most
right.
violent person on the playground, the most troubled person in your world. You're not. You don't have to put up with that. And I've seen it not only work on playgrounds, I've seen it work in nursing homes, and not punching, but someone's like being abusive and angry, and they just don't care. And again, my mother is caring for a family member right now in the last stages of Parkinson's, and with that comes the delusional thoughts sometimes. And she walked in the other day and said, "I will not be disrespected by you. I will not. I respect myself, and I expect everyone around me to respect me as well. So you're going to sit here. I'll be back in 15 minutes to see if you calm down. If you haven't, I'll give you another 15 minutes. But in the end, you will treat me with respect, or you'll be leaving my care." And in doing that, she's done it. She did it like twice in the last 3 years of care. But she did it to others every single day. Why? Because they allowed it. My mother said, "I will not be treated that way." It's not just good for your soul; it's good for the soul of the person that is in a very unhealthy way abusing you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Here's the second safeguard. And that's understanding the difference between persecution and abuse.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
think that
Yeah.
line gets fuzzy sometimes.
Yeah.
In Matthew 5:11, Jesus told his disciples, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me."
Because of me. Yeah.
Those last three words are really important there.
Yeah.
Aaron wasn't being persecuted on that playground. He was being bullied.
Yeah.
And so protecting ourselves from abuse requires us to discern
Yeah.
between being persecuted for our faith versus simply being in the path of a mean-spirited person.
Yeah.
Um, and I just recently read Jesus' words in the Gospel of Matthew to his disciples a little bit later, and he says, "If they persecute you, flee.
Yeah.
Get out of harm's way."
Yeah.
And so I think we have lumped abuse in with persecution when the two are not the same. And I think it's very important for us to distinguish
Yeah.
what's persecution and what's just flat out abuse from somebody who's a bully.
Yeah.
Um, the third safeguard, we talked about first, be convinced that standing up for yourself is right. Understand persecution is not abuse. Abuse is not persecution.
Yeah.
Uh, and then thirdly, understand what loving your enemy really means.
Mm. Okay.
Jesus said in the same chapter of Matthew, chapter 5, he said, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies."
Hmm.
And Jesus was addressing a version of the Old Testament scripture in Leviticus 19 that simply stated this: love your neighbor as yourself.
Hmm.
Somewhere along the line, the hate your enemy was tacked on to the end of that verse, probably by the teachers of the law.
Sure.
And Jesus brings correction to that. He says, don't just love your neighbor. Don't just love people who love you. Anybody can do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Love your enemy too. Now, I think what Jesus is trying to teach us here requires us to think about, what does loving my enemy really mean?
Yeah. Good.
Jim, when somebody abuses you, they're sinning. Would you
Hmm.
would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Is it loving to let somebody continue to sin
No.
against you? Is that in their best interest long term?
Nope.
Of course it isn't.
Mm.
Um, Loving people who abuse you means you can care about them and hope the best for them, and you don't retaliate in kind, and you pray for them on occasion. But it does not mean you allow them to take advantage of you. That's not in their long-term interests.
Yeah.
If I don't have enough courage to do this, then that abuser has no hope of growing up. They have no hope of maturing, because there's
Yeah.
nobody in their life who's got enough courage to say, you know what, you might get
Yeah.
away with that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
letting you get away with that here. I'd
Yeah.
love to have a relationship with you, but if you don't stop that kind of behavior, that's not possible. And we're
Yeah.
not going to allow you to do this, not just to me, but to anybody else here.
Yeah.
You'll have to find somewhere else to go if you don't work on this part of your life. That's
Yeah.
loving.
Yeah.
It's not loving to let somebody abuse you.
Right.
So talk to me about this third one, Jim, this third safeguard. What do you think?
Yeah. I think you bring out an excellent point that I've never heard it before. But loving your enemies does not mean, obviously we're past the punching them in the nose on the playground. There's
Of
a different
course.
strategy employed here, but I'm going to confront you with a reality greater than your own and not allow you to
Mhm.
deviate from it. I just won't. And I think we got to be realistic here, John, because some guys that we're talking about, the bully is the head deacon of the board
Yeah.
who's been there for 30 years. You've been there for 30 minutes. And he's
Hmm.
calling you a punk kid, and he's telling you the way it is. And he doesn't like your kids, doesn't like your wife. I don't like the way you dress. This is a significant challenge, right? To confront that and say you won't behave that way here. Well, he's connected to everything. He's connected. At least it feels that way. He's connected
Yeah.
to everything and everyone. That's why I think if the chips are going to fall because of an action that I'm going to take as a leader, I want to make sure that I've given God every opportunity. I want to be on His team, on His side, doing what I know he wants me to do. And I think wolves are very dangerous to sheep. I think wounded sheep are also very dangerous to sheep. Sick
Yeah.
sheep are infectious. Bleeding sheep turn white herds red. You know what I mean? So I just think you got to call it what it is. You've got to deal with it. It's not somebody else's problem. If you're the leader, it's your problem. You're going to have to deal with it. And there may be fallout because of it. So you better make
Right.
sure that you're right, that you do it right, that it's done well, that it's done with accountability, it's done in writing, it's done with a witness, it's done, but it's done. Because if it's not done, if everybody knows there's a problem and you're the leader and you're not dealing with it, and they know you know about it, that is costing your leadership.
Yep.
That is cost. And I've seen, and I know you have too. There are churches that have gone nowhere, and they've been through successive pastor after pastor after pastor, and it's not the location, it's not the facility, it's not the income, it's not that the community all goes to another church. It's a handful of people that have never been addressed as inappropriate, and so it will take courage, and you may not survive it. I mean, they may leave and take everybody with them, and it's you in an empty building the next Sunday. But but ultimately, you serve a God, and you're everybody's servant, but they are not your master. The day they're your master, you're in huge trouble, and they are too. So it is the most kind, the most loving, the most appropriate thing is to say no more. And this
Yep.
is why.
And we're not saying this is easy. This is probably one of the most difficult
Yeah,
pieces
yeah,
of being well,
yeah,
of being healthy.
yeah.
Um, but it's my contention that it's absolutely critical.
Yes,
So
yeah,
getting and staying healthy emotionally doesn't just require us to become our own best friend and tell anger where to go. If we're really serious about it, this third piece, Jim, this protecting ourselves from abuse,
yeah,
we've got to figure it out. And the good news is that with practice
mm,
and God's help and the support of loving friends,
yeah,
and often
yeah,
guidance from a coach or a counselor, we
yeah.
can develop this skill. I am much better at this
Yes,
today than I was when I was 30 something.
yeah,
I
yeah,
had to learn this skill if I wanted to survive.
yeah,
And so you can learn how to develop this part of your emotional
yeah,
toolkit, if you want to call it that. And when you
yeah,
learn to live that way, there's some of the things you can expect. You'll experience more joy in your
yeah,
leadership. You'll
yeah,
experience more peace. Your confidence will grow. There will be an appropriate sense of control restored to you. And
yeah,
sometimes abusive people grow up
yeah,
because they've been challenged by somebody who said, no, I'm not going to let you do that because it's not good for you, it's not good for me,
yeah,
and it's not good for the people around us.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so Jim, I'm going to let you wrap us up. I just want to say
Okay.
one thing, and I know we don't hardly ever say this, but this podcast is free.
Yeah,
And the way we grow the podcast is if you, the listener or the watcher, find value in it. So
right.
if you do find value in it, would you do us a favor and just tell a couple of people about it? Say,
Yeah,
hey, I'm listening to this podcast. It's helped me. You might want to listen to it. You can rate it. You can go to Apple, yeah, or Spotify, and you can rate the podcast. And that's just a way for us to get the content and the message to a wider audience. So if you would do that favor, we would be honored. So Jim, take
right
us
on.
away.
Yeah, so I think we all recognize how significant of an act this is, but I hope that you also understand how significant there is. Once that change occurs, there's a significant life without all the interruption, without all the confusion, without all the division and factions, and deal with it. And the only thing more painful, I think, than dealing with it is not dealing with it.
I
So
agree.
we're praying for you. We're cheering for you. We believe in you. If we can help you in any way, let us know. Convergecoach.com. And 30 minutes we can hang out. One of us on the team will hang out. We'll listen. Sometimes just that second affirming voice is all we need to have the courage to go and do what we know God told us to do. We just lack the courage to do it. So God bless you, our listeners and watchers. We love you. We're here for you. And we're cheering for you as you continue to lead from alignment.